In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We don't hear the collect for today very often. Did it sound strange to you? I had to look it up because I thought, wow, but it's the seventh Sunday of Epiphany, and we almost never get to the seventh Sunday of Epiphany because of the church year. But Easter is a little late this year, so Ash Wednesday is March 1st, and so today we hear some scripture readings and a collect that we don't hear very often. And it's too bad because they're wonderful readings, and I think they're really important for us as Christians to hear in this time and place and in our country, because they speak of God's love and how love is the most important value that we can hold. There's a couple of things before I start. First, you are not called to be a doormat. So many people hear this gospel reading and think they just have to give over to people and lay down, and is that really what I'm called to be as a Christian? No, you're not. Jesus does not call us to stay in abusive situations. Jesus doesn't call us to just sit down and put up with abusive behavior. We're not asked to sit passively and absorb suffering or abuse. So that's number one, and if that's your situation, let's talk afterwards. Number two is that Jesus is serious. This is not pie in the sky. This is not some day when God's kingdom comes. This is a way of living here and now. He was talking to his people in the present tense, not someday. So he's still on the Sermon on the Mount. So because it's the seventh Sunday of Epiphany, this is the third Sunday that we're hearing from the Sermon on the Mount. So they were sitting a long time. No wonder they got hungry at the end, right? And didn't have any food. So they're still listening. And Jesus is saying, you may have heard X, Y, Z, but now I'm telling you something different. And so he couches what he's about to say in the reality of the people who are listening to him. This is what you've heard. This is what your understanding is. I get that. I was taught the same thing. But things are different now. I have brought a new way of being and a new way of living, and so here we go. I'm going to ask you to do some things that are difficult for you. And he goes on and changes the whole paradigm of how they're living. He says, I tell you to love your neighbor and your enemy. I can imagine the gasp in the crowd, because this was not something people were used to hearing. Love your neighbor, yes, but also love your enemy. Audre Lorde, in the late 70s, said that you can't dismantle the master's house with his own tools. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about so far back, that you can't change a system by acting as if, you can't fight fire with fire. You've got to change the whole underlying agreement of the system that you're living in, and a different way completely is needed. A different change of heart to actually change things in the human world. Jesus' way was a way of prayer and a way of nonviolent resistance, a way of dealing with oppression in a very different way. And prayer will be required. He says that throughout. Prayer will be required, because if we don't place ourselves and our enemies in the hands of God, we really won't have much chance. We as humans are hardwired not to do this in a way. Our biology and our genetics tell us, and what's called our limbic system tell us that if somebody looks strange, we run the other way. If a situation seems dangerous, and our brain is making these decisions like this, we don't know it, we don't know that when I look at Todd sitting there, my brain has made a decision as to whether or not he's a threat. And if I perceive him to be a threat, well, then the rest of me finds out, and we want to run out the door very quickly. This is what kept our ancestors alive. This is the only reason we're sitting here, because when they heard something rustling in the bush, they didn't wait to find out what it was. They ran away. When someone from a different tribe was coming down the road, they didn't wait to see if they were friend or foe. They went the other way. It's part of our human biology, but it doesn't necessarily serve us here and now. And Jesus knew that a change of heart and working against so much of what is basic to us as human beings was going to be necessary if the world was going to be different. If the reign of God really could be real and could be acted on and lived out here and now, then and there. And so every time we choose not to respond negatively to someone who doesn't look like us, or someone who doesn't act or dress like us, or someone who doesn't speak like us, we're working against our own inner nature, but we are accepting Jesus' command to change our hearts and to not only love our neighbors, not only love the people who are in our homes, which is hard enough, but the people who don't look like us, act like us, talk like us. This is probably why this comes up in the seventh Sunday of Epiphany. Because it's not easy stuff. It's asking us to often act against our own self-interest. But fortunately, God doesn't leave us to our own biology. We're not left to try this on our own. Grace, the power of God, can help us to change our hearts and our minds and our culture and the way that we are together, to help us to become a more cohesive community, faithful to Jesus Christ. And the love of Christ is what compels us to act differently. Have you had that moment where you want to react and you pause for just a few seconds, and maybe your response can be a little different? And maybe that moment there is the grace of God working in our hearts and in our minds to help us to see a little bit of a different way of being, that it doesn't have to be our first reaction, but that we can respond in a way of love and a bit more discerning to the other. This is really, Jesus is talking to us about racism, about sexism, about xenophobia, all of these things that we deal with every day. Jesus is talking to us right now. I know that the world will say that it's us or them, that we have to be realistic, that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. We've all heard that we should carpet bomb, that something or someone forced your hand, that you didn't have a choice because of what happened. All of those things we hear over and over again, that become just accepted. And people will say, well, Jesus is being unrealistic. You know, he's too idealistic. That's a great standard, but, you know, we can't possibly live into that. But that's a myth. Because we claim as Christians that Jesus is our reality. Not those other voices, but Jesus. And today, he is saying to us, as a messenger from God, because he belongs to God and we belong to him, as Paul said, that we are to love our enemies, that we are not to fight evil with evil. This is who God is, and this is how God acts. And we can do it. We can do it through prayer, by praying for ourselves and for those who are our enemies in all different walks and ways of life in the world. We can do it because Jesus loves us, and we can do it because God has forgiven us. And we, in turn, can then love others and forgive others. We can love and we can forgive and we can live differently. But it's not easy, as we all know, because we're all living this. So to go back to point number 1, about not submitting to abusive situations, Jesus is really asking us to subvert that narrative. He's asking us to change the whole premise of that oppression, that if someone takes your coat, you give them your second coat. You take their power away. If they force you to walk that mile, well, then go walk a second mile and do it with a smile on your face. And take that power away from them and take it back to yourself. Refusing to accept being a victim. It's just a change in the underlying premise of being a victim and not allowing someone to force you by taking that back and choosing almost. I think I've seen this in very difficult divorces where someone is struggling because their spouse is behaving extremely badly or using the children or things like that, and you have a choice at that point. Do you do the same thing because of the end result that you're hoping for? Do you have no choice? Do they force your hand? But what do you lose in your own heart because of that? If you decide to use the master's tools to destroy the master's house. And Jesus is saying there's always another way, that you don't have to lose yourself in these kinds of situations. And I hope you've thought about Martin Luther King, because this is what he did. When people came to join his movement in the beginning, the first question he would ask them was, what's your prayer life at home? What's my prayer life at home? Well, if you didn't have one, if you couldn't tell him about your prayer discipline, he sent you back and said you were of no use to him, because he needed people who were so steeped in prayer and in Jesus and in God's grace that they could actually sit down and subvert the paradigm that people were talking about, subvert the oppression by not cooperating with it. That was a tall order, but there were people who did it, and we saw how he was able to change the culture, or the laws at least, and how Gandhi also took these words of Jesus and put them into practice for his non-resistance, nonviolent resistance. So don't stay. Don't allow yourself to be abused. Don't participate in the story you're being told, is what Jesus is saying. Take that back. And then pray and love your neighbor, but love your neighbor as yourself. Don't allow yourself to be put in those positions. That in and through Jesus we can do that. That this is God's will for us, God's will for the world, that we live with love as our standard. Not just for ourselves, not just for our neighbors, but also for our enemies. Amen. Amen.